All right, here we go. So we're so excited.
We are.
We've been planning a long time for this podcast, and I couldn't be more excited to introduce Ashely to you guys. So she's gonna be the star of our first episode, and I love that so much. So let me just introduce her to you guys. So for her job, she is a clinical nurse educator, which is so fun. She gets to teach people how to be good clinical people. So I love it. And nurses and I don't know, other things that I don't know about. So she's also, of course, one of our show hosts here at Goodbye Guilt and Shame. And then she's also an RN, which stands for Registered Nurse, Crisis Line Operator. So she gets to be available to help people understand things that are going on with their bodies when they're pregnant and answer a lot of questions that they have. So it's a pretty neat role. And then last but not least, she's also the executive director for an organization called Restored Nation. And as you guys listen to our podcast, you will hear more and more and more about Restored Nation, but we will save that for a later day.
Yeah.
So for right now, you're here to hear the hope after healing from guilt and shame. And so Ashely's going to just start off by sharing her real life story with us. And I think she's so wonderful and brave for doing that. And so Ashely, why don't you just go ahead and start by describing the trauma for our listeners. Talk to us a little bit about what life was like and what you experienced.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to finally get this kicked off and to share just a little bit about my story and hopefully it helps one of you. So I was raised by my grandparents, which was honestly pretty fantastic. My mom and dad, however, were never really together. And my grandma took me in, which was wonderful. But my first, I would say real trauma in life that I can remember is in 4th grade. So my grandfather died, and he was my really only father figure. And it just led me on this path of searching for love in all the wrong places, many other women out there as well.
Yep.
And that led me to teen pregnancy. And so fast forwarding into the teen years, at 16, I got pregnant with my first son, John Russell, and he was born prematurely. So just thinking trauma after trauma. And so when he was born, he was only 2 pounds, 6 ounces, just so small. And before he even got out of NICU, my boyfriend and I were pregnant again. And even though we chose life the first time and really were, I'm going to say super brave to do so because it was not easy choice.
Right.
We just couldn't imagine letting so many people down. Right. That we got pregnant again. And I felt this overwhelming sense of what did you do? Internally.
Yeah.
I just couldn't believe that I let this happen.
Right.
And so we chose abortion. And honestly, I just kind of locked that up deep inside and had to move on. It was survival mode.
Right.
And so John Russell came home from the hospital just a couple weeks later and full of all the needs, right? As a premature child is. If you fast forward just a couple more months, at 6 months old, he actually died.
Yeah.
And it was, called shaken baby syndrome at the hands of his father. I'll just say it, I don't believe it was purposeful, and I just want to say that in case his dad ever hears it. However, it just left us in utter shambles.
Yeah.
And as teens sometimes do when they don't learn the first time, just within a couple of months, I was pregnant again.
Right.
And I was so excited. I felt I'm going to get a second chance, right, to be a mom. And sometimes that sounds silly when you think, Ashely, you were only 17, you had your whole life, but it didn't feel that way.
Right.
It didn't feel like the whole life was ahead of me at that point. When you're in constant survival mode, my boyfriend just couldn't handle the thought of going through another pregnancy and having a baby. And so we ended up choosing abortion again. We just told no one. I was really close to being 18. And so we just kind of held out our secret. And after all of that, I just was never the same.
Yeah.
It's never the same. I just had no tools to deal with the overwhelming grief that I felt at the loss of my children. ended up fast forwarding, got married, had kids young, had 3 more kids.
Yeah.
And they're all with me today. A bunch of teenagers in the house. Y'all pray for me. It's wild. But something just was never the same. So lots of what I like to call, in the nursing world, we call it negative life cycles.
Mm-hmm.
And so you'll see people who repeatedly fall into these cycles of depression and anxiety. I mean, you can call it whatever you want, just like I can't get out of bed, I can't function. That survival mode just continued.
Right.
And I never really knew why. I kind of chalked it up to like life circumstance, and I ended up getting a divorce, and being a young mom is hard.
Yeah, it is.
And it was really easy just to kind of be like, well, it's just anxiety, or it's just this, or it's hard to pay my bills, so I'm sad about it, whatever.
Right.
But then we moved across the country, which was also wild. I like to do wild things, apparently. And in doing so, we got connected with a local church. And I went to this woman's retreat, honestly, for a break. I was like, y'all, I need a break for my kids. Like, the beach, yes, sign me up. And so I went, and I only knew 2 other people. And we were just kind of floating along.
Right.
But I heard you share your story.
Yeah.
And I never talked about my abortions, like, ever. I mean, I would talk about John Russell with select people that I felt, I don't know, I could share the space with. I did often talk about it with my patients if there was if I needed to connect with them, or something like that, but I didn't really just like share it and broadcast it.
Right.
It's hard to be like, how many kids do you have? Oh, I have 3 here and 1 it's complicated and it's a lot.
Right.
But hearing you share your story, and I was just like, what? They've got like a group for people that've had abortions? Like, people actually go and sit around and talk about it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was like, I gotta have that. Like, I'm tired of living this way.
Right.
And at the same time, I said yes, and I went up and was like, I just want to do whatever it is that you're doing. I want to be a part of that.
Right.
Months go by, and I will never forget the text message when you asked me to go to coffee. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have a new best friend. Like, I totally forgot, you guys. Like, the thought of group had just, that was 3 months ago.
Right.
I'm busy worried about Christmas with this time.
Yep.
Oh my gosh. And so, anyways, fast forward even more. And I did my first group. And I'm not going to be like, it was, butterflies and rainbows. It was hard work.
Yeah.
It was hard work.
Yep.
And just to give you, like, an insight, think of the OG COVID, you guys, when the world was shutting down, and right before it shut down, we finished group.
Yeah.
So it was like mad chaos. I was working in an urgent care setting, 40 to 60 hours a week. I had a bunch of young kids at home, my sweet husband, Delbert, and it was just wild. It was bananas every day.
Yep, it was. You did it.
But I did it. Mm-hmm. And after the group, I just was never the same. And my husband will tell people that now. Mm-hmm. He'll be like, my wife is not the same person she was. Mm-hmm. And not to say, we all have sad days. We all have days where things feel overwhelming.
Right.
But the hope and the joy I never knew I could experience. Mm-hmm. It's just grown every year.
Yeah. Just
tenfold. And every time I get the honor to sit with another woman or even men and just share my story and lead them through group, it's just wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just wild.
So what would you say when you think back to group?
Yeah.
Help them to understand maybe what that turning point was for you. Was there a specific process? Was there almost like a revelation that you had, something that helped you kind of lay down that guilt and shame, or say, no more, I'm not dealing with this anymore, and walk towards forgiveness or freedom or whatever it was you felt on the other side of that?
Honestly, the first chapter that I did on my own, before group even started, I'd known of Jesus my whole life.
Yeah.
I'd known of him my whole life, but to really understand who I am because of what he did, blew my mind.
Right.
And then in group, hearing from women who had already been through that, you don't have to carry this. you have to recognize what you did, but it's not about what you did now. This is about grieving your children that are no longer with you.
Right.
And you don't have to carry that like a, the red letter A on your shirt everywhere. Like, you can grieve them and give them, what's the word I want to use? Just honor.
Yeah, dignity, honor.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And doing that, being able to say it out loud and not feel like the overwhelming shame that I felt my whole life.
Yeah.
Was probably the biggest turning point.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt that in group, but it just grew outside of group. The more I processed and talked about it, shared my story with friends and loved ones, it just kind of exploded from there.
Mm-hmm.
And now I don't need to feel shameful of that. He died for that.
Yeah. Did forgiveness play a role for you in hope and healing?
Yes, absolutely. And it's hard. It's hard to forgive people that have hurt you.
Yeah.
Especially people that you're still in relationship with.
Right.
But having to look at it and be like, I'm not trying to blame, so to speak, like my mom for anything or my dad for anything. But hey, these choices that they made caused me to live this life and set me up for these choices that I made later.
Absolutely.
And I need to recognize where they were at and let that go so that I could move on.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Forgiveness is key.
It is so good.
Yeah.
So I guess let's wrap up, because we're just going to focus on keeping our first episode, our first show, pretty short.
Yeah. Brief.
We want you guys to get to know us and know that we're for real, and we have some stuff to share, but not keep you here all day. So why don't you tell the listeners why you want to do this podcast? Like, why are we doing this?
So I want to do this because I want other men and women to know that they don't have to live life that way. Yeah. They don't have to be sad all the time or angry all the time or have these repetitive cycles. There's a different way to live. Yes. And it's possible. It's attainable. Yeah. And I just want to shout it from the rooftop. So hoping it just reaches at least one person.
Yeah.
Right?
That's good.
Yeah.
That's so good. That's right. So each week we, we're looking forward to not only introducing ourselves to you guys, but more individuals that we have the pleasure of working with that help others say goodbye to guilt and shame. We will be interviewing group leaders from groups that we are not personally a part of, but that we know of and that we know are doing really great things and are available to you, the listener, to help if something applies to your life. So do come back to hear more of that, and we'll be, we're just going to be giving you guys so much information every week, and we're so excited to share these free resources. These resources that we'll be sharing, our goal is to share the ones that are free or nearly free, where there's,
absolutely,
this is attainable for all people. We, that's really, really important to us. So thank you guys for listening, and we're excited to come back next week with some more information for you guys. So thanks, Ashely.
Thank you
for everything. That was awesome.
This is wonderful.
I just can't wait for you guys to get to know her more and more. You're going to want to be her bestie. All right, you guys. Thanks for listening, and just remember that tomorrow can be better than today.
Absolutely.
All right, you guys. Take care. This week's show, we are so excited to hear from our host, Ashely. Today, she is going to be telling us her real-life story of hope that came from healing from the guilt and shame that she was carrying. So stay tuned. You will not want to miss this story.